Yep, okay, I get it. I know exactly why you clicked on this video. You wanted to see how wrong I was regarding my championship standing predictions or something.
But when it comes to the most improved driver, I think that could be Logan Sargeant. He will score more points, or at least 10 points or something.
10 points or something? 10 points or something?
Oh dear, but hey, he technically didn't finish last in the championship, so that's a plus. So in regards to the team placements, I'll just lightly touch upon them, and I thought that Haas would be dead last like they were in 2023. How wrong I was. That was probably one of the biggest stinkers I had in my entire predictions. However, I was able to guess correctly that Mercedes would be 4th in the constructors, and that Aston Martin would be 5th. Basically Aston Martin finishing off where they were exactly last year. And then I thought Williams would be 7th again. No, they ended up finishing 9th. And McLaren I underestimated, and even they, according to Zach Brown, were thinking that they would actually be 3rd in the constructors. That was what their goal was for 2024, but they overachieved. Albeit they did make a little bit of a hash of it in the middle of the season. And as for Red Bull, well, they're 3rd place. They're not 1st like I predicted, but at least Ferrari were indeed runners-up in the constructors, and it was a very close one indeed, only 14 points in it. But I know exactly why you're here. I've also got myself a little bit of a scoring format for you. I shall flash it on screen right here, so you can take a note of things, and if you made predictions of your own, you can play along as well. As you can see here, it promotes handsomely accuracy if you get it spot on, but it punishes inaccuracy more as you get further away from the actual position the driver finished in. Right off the bat, we are not including drivers who joined in the middle of the season, so you got no Jack Doohans, no Liam Lawsons, no Oliver Behrmans, but their positions will factor into the 20 drivers who started off the season when I made my original prediction. And I started off P20, and P19, the two Haas boys, Nico Hülkenberg in 19th and Kevin Magnussen in 20th. And I'm not going to lie, based on my calculations and my scoring system, these are the biggest detriments in my entire widget. Kevin Magnussen at the bottom? No, he ended up scoring 5 times more points than he did in 2023. That, I would say, is quite a triumphant final season, and it wasn't really one of his worst. It was quite a solid campaign, considering. And this was just a nice little way to end things, and he had a really triumphant and fiery and very Kevin Magnussen-esque end to proceedings in Formula 1, as in getting a race ban, having many tangles and crashes, and many expletives on the radio, very much worthy of a Viking. And as for Nico Hülkenberg, I'm not going to lie to you, based on these calculations, he ended up finishing 11th. Magnussen finished P15, so 5 positions off for Kevin, 8 for Hülkenberg, and that's minus 15 points right off the get-go. So as you can probably tell, I'm already in negative territory. Hopefully things will get better as we go along. But Nico, my goodness, I thought he would be relying on just sprint points to be able to get by, but no. Haas overperformed, Komatsu's now got themselves an absolute unit of a team, and who's to say whether or not they might end up being works partners with Toyota should they deem to want to come back in 2028 alongside General Motors. And I bet you, since General Motors is coming back, it will be Cadillac Power Works team, Toyota also having a big influence and presence in America. Of course they'll want to have a slice of the pie against Ford, GM, some of their biggest competitors across the globe. Of course they will. And they'll do it with Haas, but give it time. They're not going to go in immediately for 2026. They're going to be very patient about it, so watch this space. But Nico, Kevin, did a really good job. They completely outperformed my expectations. And then, in P18, I predicted it would be Zhou Guanyu. In reality, he ended up P20. So, this wasn't so bad, only 2 positions off my actual predictions. So, there you go. After all of those points lost, I ended up getting 1 point back. P14 in China, and then getting that magnificent 8th place in Qatar. That was a really nice little bit of a tour de force. It meant that he actually wasn't bottom, and that at least one of the Saubers broke the top 20. Although having said that, in an intentionally 20 driver series, that's not really saying much, but yeah. Sure enough, Sauber, as I thought, wouldn't be electric. They would have reliability issues, but it wasn't just the car, it was the entire operation that was essentially unreliable. But now, thankfully, with Mattia Binotto, Jonathan Wheatley coming in, I feel like things will turn around. I don't expect Sauber to be leapfrogging up the order next year, because I think many teams will be thinking of 2026. But I think the battle between Williams and maybe VCarb, it might be closer. So Sauber won't be completely off everybody else, but it's still going to be a bit of a challenge to not be 10th. But then it all goes downhill again with Logan Sargeant. I predicted P17. He finished P23. 6 positions off. So yeah, there you go. back on form, negative points. So, oh dear. I thought he would score so many points that he would prove the doubters wrong. No, he proved the doubters right. And it was really tough to try and be a Logan Sargeant well-wisher, but the fact is, though, is that 2024 was probably even worse than 2023. The car was going against him. The writing was on the wall after Melbourne when Logan was asked to give Alex his car, and then that was in vain since Alex didn't score, even though it looked like he was probably going to. And it was just essentially, Logan was not part of Williams' future story, as was made evident because Vowles was talking to Sainz, because even if Logan saw through the year, then Carlos would have replaced him anyway, so maybe this was a kindness, because Logan's now got a spot in European Le Mans, so his future career in motorsport is not yet over, although many people thought he would be partnering up with Kramer in IndyCar. I thought that too. But, okay, maybe some time away from the spotlight in a quieter series, but not necessarily an unprestigious one, alongside Jamie Chadwick, by the way, in the same team, so that's kind of neat. But we shall see what happens with Logan, but yeah, this was not a good start. And then Valtteri Bottas, I predicted P16, P22. So another 6 positions off, more minus points. Fun. Again, no points scored, but this time not through any fault of his own. I really seriously hoped that he would have scored some points at the beginning of the season. It looked like he was probably going to, especially in China. Maybe 10th or 9th or something like that. And then he had a couple of good Q3 appearances, but the race pace of that Sauber, the C44, simply was not there. And even when the pit crew managed to get on form, and they actually put in some competent 2.3s and 2.4s every now and again, that simply was too little too late. But again, hopefully the next Sauber, the final Sauber, will be better. Unfortunately, Bottas and Joe won't be there to sample it, because Hülkenberg and Bortoletto will be. And it really makes me upset that Bortoletto is getting a lot of hate for the fact that he's using Vettel's number 5. Come on, it was going to be used no matter what. Mansell didn't care that Vettel was using number 5. He didn't care, so why should we care? It's going to be used eventually. Kimi doesn't care about Jack using the number 7. Just come on, move on. Then we got Esteban Ocon. I predicted he would be P15 in the classification, and he ended up P14, so only 1 position off. Not that bad. So a nice little clutch of points to my name, finally, after that disaster of the bottom few drivers. But I predicted that it would be a close call between he and Gasly, but as we saw ultimately in the points tally, even though Esteban put in a jolly good effort at the beginning of the season, when it became clear that Ocon was not long for Alpine, the developmental shift moved over to Gasly, meaning that the deficit between he and the existing Frenchman was meaning that it was going to be completely Gasly all the way. But he managed to end up in P14, not that bad, and sure enough, I did predict that eventually it would come to blows, that if they were scrabbling Alpine for 10th or 11th, that one of them would try and do some daring move, and look what happened in Monaco. And then there's Pierre Gasly, I thought would be finishing ahead of him in P14. But no, I underestimated the Frenchman. And quite frankly, Pierre actually had one of his best seasons in terms of scoring points. And 10th place, it's not that terrible. It's the same position he finished in 2020. So that's some good going, a really good recovery drive in the final race of the season. It really does give me hope. I want to watch Pierre and see how he does in 2025 if Alpine can continue this momentum. And there is no reason why they can't do that, because development for 2025 probably won't be that much different. And if Alpine are on a roll, the rules are consistent, yeah, I think they could probably match 6th place again. I don't think they can do much better. I don't think they're going to leapfrog past Aston Martin, but best of the rest, certainly doable, certainly contesting again with Haas, but Pierre did a really good job as the bastion of the team. And even though I did lament over the season that he had no choice of going anywhere else, well, he still doesn't, but at least with Alpine, or if it becomes high-tech, he can be a solid, dependable lead driver at a team that will want him, and that's very important. Then I put in Alex Albon P13, and I will be getting into this with my wild predictions, which are different from my champion predictions, of expecting Alex getting multiple top 5 finishes. I thought at least 2, didn't come close, although Baku was close, P7. Not that bad, but still, I predicted 13th, he finished 16th. Not that terrible, meaning pretty much I don't get any points at all, so that's not terrible. I'm reminding you, if it's less than 3 positions off, it's either a plus or completely zip, so it doesn't really affect my score. So I did think that Alex would end up with a few more points finishes, and he did get some, but it wasn't as triumphant as 2023, and it really gave me a bit of a false dawn thing, but really I shouldn't have expected that, because James Vowles was saying, like, look, 2024, it's going to be a burner year, really. If we finish 9th, doesn't really matter. We're changing our processes. penalties, although admittedly James probably could have done without all those crashes because it was completely unsustainable. Nigh on an estimated $11 million of damage, and Alex was one of the causes of that. May I remind you, Alex was responsible for that massive repair bill, not just Logan and Franco. Let's just be real here. You can't just completely admonish Alex because he's popular. And then I predicted Yuki Tsunoda in 12th place. And where did he finish? 12th! Yeah! 10 points! Finally! Dead on Yuki Tsunoda. Excellent. 10 points to me. And now hopefully I can claw back some dignity. And yes, indeed. Out of all of the VCARB drivers, Yuki ended up being the highest scoring one, with some of their best results. And even though it did fall off toward the end of the year, as it did for Liam and Daniel as well, it proved that the drivers, they're not the problem, it's the team. Them becoming this existing enterprise with all of this extra sponsorship money, all a lot of investment is coming in, so maybe next year could be a little bit more consistent, but it might not really count for anything if their strategy department is still a little bit inconsistent, people being brought in too early, the wrong strategy, and if the clutch goes, as seen by Yuki quite a few times this season, it can lead to all of that good form getting into Q3 or near Q3, completely a waste of time. And at some points, Yuki was in contention for 10th place in the championship. For this team, not bad at all. And it was very, very close between he, Pierre, and Hulkenberg. So that is not bad at all. So Yuki, 12th, managed to nail it. Finally, here's to more. And then I slightly overestimated the achievements of Lance Stroll. I predicted he would finish P11. He ended up being 13th. So not that far off, but it's just a case of what happened last year, because I predicted that in 2024 he would start off strong and then lose his mojo. And then it kind of happened this year, but to a far lesser extent, although I don't think there is any mojo left to try and find after what happened in Brazil, because, may I remind you, Lance, there was an escape route! And just when I thought I was going to be really, really positive and hopeful that I could get some good form back onto this list, no. Daniel Ricciardo, I predicted P10, he finished P17. That wasn't the worst of them, but for Daniel Ricciardo, that really shouldn't be a place that he's at. So that's a huge chunk of points gone from that, basically negating my Tsunoda win. This L from Ricciardo. Oh dear. Oh dear. I, like Daniel, probably thought this would have been his shot to get back at Red Bull Racing after his few years in the wilderness at other teams, but nah. Turns out that he just simply couldn't do enough against Yuki, and he was with a team that simply did not have the infrastructure, nor the strategical efforts and gumption to be able to give him a car to get some consistent finishes. And the beginning of the year especially, loads of crashes, especially with Albon and Suzuka. It was just really, really galling to see, and it was just sad, and it was really sad especially seeing his chirpy little face in Belgium, him thinking that the writing was on the wall for Checo and that he would get his chance for the rest of the year, even if that was it for the rest of his career. At least he could get back to where he originally started and intended to be. And for those of you thinking that he's going to be coming back in Cadillac, people actually asked him, and then he simply said, nah, I'm done. Sure enough, I was right. Because Daniel, is he really wanting to go through that process again, like he did this year? Nah, I think he's done. He's going to be going to promote his wine and his clothesline and maybe think about what other motorsport he wants to take part in a couple of years' time. But yeah, he's got some time. He can rest. He's had a good run. He's had a good run. But unfortunately, 2024 wasn't one of his best seasons. But that was mostly hampered down to the team, somewhat. But in terms of the spirits, he was still chipper. And then I predicted Fernando Alonso would be 9th place, and sure enough, he was 9th place! Yes! I've already done better than 2023, yet another spot-on figure. Fernando would be the best of the rest, as in not a front-running team. So there you go. Another correct placement. I am really happy about that. And it wasn't even close to him having to be bothered with anyone in 10th place or below, because he was sort of in no man's land, way behind Sergio Perez, who did end up 8th. So let me tell you and assure you, I was already quite far off with Checo. I vastly overestimated his potential. But Fernando, yeah, he was about a good 30-ish points away from 10th place, ultimately Pierre Gasly. But he led his race, he managed to act as a good team leader for Aston Martin, and he was very, very important, because I can imagine that if Alonso was not on form like he was at the beginning of 2024, Aston Martin would be very, very concerned with the likes of Alpine and Haas staging a last-minute gasp for 5th place in the constructors, and I think they might have been beaten, maybe even down to 8th. It's that bad. Fernando made that much of a difference, and now Adrian Newey is going to be coming along. 2025, I don't know how much of an influence Adrian's going to have. He's going to be focusing on 2026, but watch the space with Fernando. He might do better next year, but right now, I'm quite happy with P9, and I think he'll take P9, quite frankly. That's the best of anyone who isn't a top 14. Then in 8th place, I pegged Carlos Sainz, and that was me underestimating him because he ultimately finished 5th. So only 3 positions off, not that terrible, but it doesn't really contribute to my score at all. But quite frankly, after the horrific run down in the bottom order, I will take a simple zip. Because it turned out that, yes, the car was probably moving away from Carlos a little bit to favour Charles Leclerc because Carlos was the one leaving, but ultimately, it didn't really seem to matter. Carlos just continued to do what he did. He raced for himself, which did benefit Ferrari to some extent, and he played his part in making sure that Ferrari were contenders for the constructors. And even though they didn't win it, it wasn't Ferrari's year. I think it's a year Ferrari can be proud of, and Carlos did really well. He was within 2 points of getting 4th place in the championship, so having Ferrari 3rd and 4th in the driver's standings would have been a real tour de force, but 5th place is still pretty credible, and still far more than I would have expected considering where everything was going. The news of Lewis Hamilton going over to the Scuderia was really fresh when I made those predictions. So yeah, Carlos did a really good job and managed to rise above all of that and ended up with a really dignified exit, bowing out, going to Williams, really stamping down his authority there on day 1. And even though many people are thinking, oh, don't read into testing times, I'm not reading into testing times, but the commitment that Carlos is showing already at that team, I'm really excited, and I really hope that Alex can respond, and maybe Williams might have a shout at getting back to 7th place as they were in 2023. And then in 7th place, I predicted George Russell, and where did he finish? P6, so that was only 1 position off. And it really does go to show that even though the W15 was now geared slightly more to his teammate to try and make up for the W14 being woefully away from Hamilton's feedback and own thoughts and hopes, I still think that Russell held his own. He got a couple of wins, he added more to his name. Belgium was fantastic had it not been for Mercedes' mistake in terms of the tyres and weights and stuff like that. But there was a positive direction for this driver. And even though he ultimately finished with less points against Lewis over their 3 seasons together, I still feel like the upward progression in terms of qualifying against Lewis is something that he can be proud of. That even though there were moments that Lewis did outclass him, especially towards the end game of any race, there were moments that George was able to outperform him. And I know that many people are going to be thinking, well, wait a minute, Lewis was running experimental parts and there's sabotage. Mercedes wanted to punish him for leaving. No. There's no evidence to prove that. Not really. And why would any team want to have to the detriment of one of their drivers, especially if they want to attract other drivers? If that came out as true, who would want to race for Mercedes that isn't part of the Mercedes fold? That's just completely nonsensical. But yeah, George, he finished slightly higher than I predicted, so not terrible. And even better, Oscar Piastri, I predicted would be P6, so it would have been a progression from his place in 2023, but no, he managed to get a couple of wins for himself and ended up being P4. I also predicted that he would get another sprint win, and he did, albeit a gift from Lando, but then to be fair, Oscar did gift Lando the sprint win in Brazil, so swings and roundabouts really. So technically, out of those 2 sprint weekends, Oscar did legitimately win 1, as did Lando. And I did predict that Oscar, even though he is my favourite, he is my boy, I did predict he would lose the intra-team battle. But the qualifying deficit is slightly smaller than it was in 2023. It's getting there, there is a slight improvement, but there are many things that Oscar really needs to take into consideration for 2025 in order to be a true championship contender and to consistently beat Lando. And that is to not make mistakes in qualifying and being able to handle dirty air. So that's something that the team really need to do with the MCL 39 to make sure it can be a little bit more forgiving when it's running right behind another car. But who's to say whether or not the MCL 40 for 2026 might be even better? Who knows? But we shall see. But yeah, Oscar outperformed my expectations, and that is really, really good. And then Lewis Hamilton, I predicted would be P5. He ended up being P7, so 2 positions off. Not terrible, so as you can probably tell, I'm starting to get better as the top 10 progresses. And even though Lewis Hamilton, his time with Mercedes came to a bit of a questionable end, it wasn't the worst, and Abu Dhabi proved to be a really solid performance, and Vegas could have easily been a win had he not had that mistake in Q3 in that time, and it was really a sign that Mercedes were turning a corner. And even though Lewis had moments of despair and wanting to end races sooner, retire the car, he wasn't racing in a way that was screaming out that he should retire from Formula 1 altogether. It was just a sign that his time with Mercedes was over and that he needed a change of scene. And I think he will do better at Ferrari. I don't know how exactly he will fare against Charles Leclerc, but I think it will certainly energize him enough to be able to continue for another couple of years at his near best form. Who knows? I'm really excited to see. But his final season with Mercedes, he had things to be proud about. He won the British Grand Prix for a record 9th time, so that's something he could be proud of. He had another win as well at Spa. He had weekends where he was truly happy and on cloud 9, unlike in 2023, where it was pretty much just all sad, except for that Hungary qualifying, which was then completely wiped out. So here's to Lewis and how he fares in the championship, and my predictions for 2025. Oh, those are going to be very, very precarious. Then in 4th place, I predicted that it would be Charles Leclerc, and he ended up finishing in P3. Not terrible again, so as you can tell, I'm gaining some momentum. I'm starting to claw back some of my dignity, finally. Very, very surprisingly so. But Charles Leclerc proved to be even more aggressive than I predicted. I predicted and anticipated that 2024 would be a year that he'd be proving to his bosses that he should be the one that they would back, even with Lewis Hamilton coming along. He was going up against another multiple world champion like he was against Sebastian Vettel, and he wants to try and do the same thing again of outclassing them and outperforming them. So I think this season has been a really good justification in which to maintain the status quo. He's come alive. This has been his best season ever. He's scored more points than any other season. He's equaled the most amount of wins in a single season, and he's won at Monaco. That is a huge weight off of his mind. And another win at Monza. That's going to be even better. Having a Ferrari driver on your books who's won Monza twice, that's going to put him down in Ferrari history. They love him there. They are not going to abandon him just because Lewis Hamilton arrives. They are still going to cherish him no matter what happens. And this 3rd place, bravo. And at one point, it was looking like it was going to be the runner-up spot, especially after Lando Norris lost his way for a little bit. And sure enough, he did outperform my expectations. I predicted he would be 3rd place in the championship, and then he goes and gets P2. Not that bad. And at one point, it looked like it was going to be dead on. And even though the gap did increase to 80, it came back to 63 again with a triumphant win in Abu Dhabi, ending the season on a high note for him. So that was really, really good and a really good motivator. And I really feel like then the pressure was off. Lando could start to collect himself after the disaster of Brazil. And we might see a Norris which is a lot calmer and less likely to beat himself up in press conferences, and maybe just have a better support network behind the scenes. Maybe try and not be so self-deprecating on the camera where people could pick into it and it would be unnecessary further criticism. And even though loads of people are calling him still a bottler, I still feel like, yeah, okay, it happened. McLaren admitted that they weren't expecting to be in this position right now, but this has been vitally good information and good experience for Lando and McLaren. So both entities are going to be going into 2025 on a really good foot. They are going to have really good form. It's consistent. There are no big changes or risks being taken. There are no weaknesses, seemingly. I feel like it's really good for Norris to be a contender for the championship next year. I'm not making a call right now. It's far too soon. We haven't even seen the 2025 cars yet. But 3rd place, I predicted. 2nd, still pretty good. Still pretty good. But can you probably tell who I predicted 2nd? Sergio Perez. No, he finished P8. Oh, that was a good run as well. -5 for me. Oh, I thought he would have done well. I thought he would have taken all of the criticism he got in 2023 and then just completely battered aside. He would handle it better, shake it off much more easily. He did do that, but the performance really did not stick around after China, and Miami was just a disaster. The car moved away from him. The RB20 was simply not a car that he could adapt to. His own words, not mine, or speculation. And then he just completely fell off. No podiums, barely getting into the top 5, mostly out of the top 5, loads of DNFs, loads of exits in Q1, and now he's fighting for his life with the Red Bull shareholders. We still don't know the evidence and the reality and the result of what that meeting transpired, and we probably won't until the new year, so that means they can have a relaxing Christmas. But I did correctly guess, even though you could easily say it was cop-out, Max Verstappen, champion, boom, another 10 points. So 3 correct guesses this year. Not that bad. And I also predicted, this is sort of related to Checo, that the gap between them would be less than 200 points. Ultimately, it ended up being less than 300, so about 285 roughly between Checo and Max, and that's not good. And this was probably one of Max's best seasons because, yeah, sure, it wasn't a close contest like it was in 2021 or the beginning of 2022, but there were moments when people were starting to doubt Max Verstappen's conduct and whether he would have the integrity and the patience and the anger management capability to be able to go up against Lando, but sure enough, he did. He was able to prove all doubters wrong. Even though he was up against the people like the FIA, a lot of things were up against him, and he still managed to overcome them all. So that is something that Max can be proud of. It was probably one of his best championship wins ever, just for the fact there was a little bit of a moment where you thought, ooh, he might not win this. But then he came back strong. Brazil, one of the best performances I've ever seen from a driver, especially Max. Absolutely brilliant. But one thing you're wanting to know from this video is, did I do better than I did in 2023? Well, if I take this scoring system into account for my 2023 results, I scored that year -10. And compared to 2024, it is, drumroll please, +2! Yeah! It's a plus! It's a plus! Yeah! Just, by the way, if it's a plus score, then it means that I was more right than wrong. So, I was slightly wrong in 2023, but now I'm just ever so tinily, minusculely correct. Or at least on the right track. So, as you can probably tell from the results, the top 10 was not that far off except for Checo. He's the big blot, and I just vastly underestimated Haas. I lost a lot of points because of them, and then Bottas, that whole situation. Let me know in the comments what your predictions were, and if you want to use the scoring system, leave your score down in the comments, and that would be really, really fun. And if you want to stick around for my 2025 predictions, maybe do consider subscribing to the channel. So that means we can have a lot of fun with this, see how wrong we are, and it's just all part of the F1 content creator game. Don't worry, there'll be plenty of these retrospective videos coming soon because I gotta pad out the off-season somehow. But if you want to see who I thought were the winners and losers for the entire 2024 season, you can go and watch this video next straight after this one.